I train with Caio, I hold pads for him, and to take the beating that Shaflarski took and was able to finish the 3 rounds, hats off to that guy. He's got my respect.
He was.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, I'm here with Chris Franco,
Thanks,
coach
Jeremy.
of Caio Machado. First off, man, congratulations.
Thank you.
Dana White's Contender Series. I interviewed Caio a couple weeks ago prior to his fight. Amazing interview. He really has come into himself in terms of media as well as inside the fight game. And I want to say, before we talk about his fight and whatnot, you've obviously been in the game for a long time.
Yeah.
You're one of the first MMA schools in Vancouver. You've had, Paul Lazenby, a guy who's come up with you in the scene. He's in a few pictures here in your back office here.
Yeah.
Come up, he's a champ with you. You have your partner, Jaden Martin, local champ. You've now got Caio. You had Maria, who's coaching outside right now. She's amateur champion. So what's it feel like to have a guy finally in the UFC?
So, interesting enough, and not many people really put this together, but I was already cornering in the UFC back in UFC 24. Now, a funny story is, Lance Gibson and I had a gym called Franco Gibson,
Yeah.
which was actually considered the first MMA school in Canada, per se, right? Controversial, but we took claim to it, and at the end of the day, we own it, right?
Yeah.
So moving forward, I took a Greyhound bus, Jeremy, for 4 days and 4 nights, all the way there to corner, because Matt Hume set up the fight. Matt Hume was our coach, and Lance and I would train together, and we trained each other. So we were training we did it all, right?
Yeah.
We were traveling, fighting in Super Brawl, King of the Cage, Shuto, you name it. So UFC 24 came along, and Lance got the fight against Jermaine Andre. So we're talking, 260 some odd UFCs ago?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So here I am. Matt got the ticket to go. So I had 2 nickels to rub back then. Took a Greyhound bus 4 days and 4 nights to Louisiana, cornered Lance, and then took a bus 4 days and 4 nights back.
Man.
And meanwhile, on that night, and I had a talk I told Dana White this actually, because he came to see us in the change room before Caio went out to fight, and he goes, and this conversation came up.
Yeah.
I go, did you realize that at UFC 24, you guys are the ones who offered me $25,000 to step in to fight Pedro Izo? Because what happened was Kevin Randleman slipped on some pipes in the back, and he banged his head, and he became concussed. The fight was canceled, the super fight that night. And it was funny because I was walking by the pipes and I looked at it, I go, someone's going to slip on these pipes.
Yeah.
It's a little dangerous. A couple minutes later, I hear this bang. It's Kevin Randleman. Slipping, falling, banged the back and said, knocked unconscious. Pedro Izo is out with the super fight, and Marco Ruiz is talking to the management and saying who we can get. Matt Hume came up to me and offered me $25,000 to fight Pedro Izo. I had slept for 4 days and 4 nights on a bus, number 1. Number 2, I had no camp to train for Pedro. And number 3, it's Pedro Izo.
Yeah.
You don't want to do anything half-fast with Pedro Izo. I would have came back concussed myself. So, moving forward, I told Dana that he started laughing, and then we talked about fasting and stuff like that. And then, it leads to now me, what you're talking about, 23 years later, I'm back coaching.
So a different, obviously, landscape with the UFC nowadays compared to back then. And I mean, back then was still a day and age, UFC 23. It was a day and age where it's boxer versus jiu-jitsu, kickboxer versus wrestler. It's more that the MMA guys were just starting to become MMA guys.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So nowadays we see guys that have come up in the game that are MMA guys. Like, it started with Rory McDonald, I think, where he started training MMA. He wasn't a jiu-jitsu guy, he wasn't a kickboxing guy, he wasn't a boxer. He was
right.
the whole game. And that's what we're seeing nowadays. The prodigies of the sport started training MMA from a young age.
Well, Jeremy, from one nerd to the other, because I know you guys called me nerd last time in the conversation, Marco Ruiz was the one. Remember, King of the Streets,
Yes,
Marco Ruiz?
yes.
UFC number 7. He's the one who showed that you got to be well-rounded. He beat Paul Varlins, who was twice his size.
Yeah.
He beat Remco Pardul, who was a judo guy. He was able to show adaptability because he had that equal stand and ground philosophy. And that really, I love that philosophy. And Marco Ruiz really inspired me back then to train in that kind of well-rounded system. Of course, Matt did it as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So nowadays, as we said, you finally have an official Franco kickboxing pancreation guy in the UFC.
Yeah.
And I mean, long time coming. You've had guys that were, as I said, Jaden Martin. He was a prodigy coming up through the ranks. And
He still is.
He still is. He's
just got, he's nursing an injury.
Injury prone and whatnot. Hasn't been in the cage for some time. So you never know. We could see him inside the UFC octagon as well. But you've got Caio there now. He had an amazing fight. Some fans obviously weren't too impressed by it. But again, how does it feel to finally have a guy signed to the UFC?
Okay, what a weight lifted, because the pressure was on with Caio to get that UFC contract, number one. But number two, for decades, you can hear my students in here, former athletes that I had. My goal is to bring someone to the UFC. I want to bring someone to the UFC all the way. And I started with Caio in his first pro MMA fight, right? And we watched his fight with Jamie Smith, the fight to a draw.
Yep.
He's come a long
Very long way.
Right?
And what interests me about that actually is you said you've watched the fight, so you've heard the commentary team. Laura Sanko saying it, Paul Felder saying it, that they're expecting him to try and take the fight to the ground. And yes, his last two performances were submission wins, but I don't see him as a ground fighter. I see him as a complete fighter, and I see his game more, he's going to pressure you and beat the crap out of you, basically.
You got it. The thing is with Caio, he loves to knock a guy out.
Yes.
He'd rather get a knockout than a submission, but he's definitely open to the submission game. He's very well-rounded. The thing is with this fight with Shaflarski, I felt the commentators weren't really educated on where Caio was coming from in terms of his background, quality of opposition.
Yes.
Shaflarski, they knew, because you got John Jones tooting him about being, one of the up-and-coming heavyweight, and then also he had an 11-fight winning streak. And you look at all the stats with the analytics that comes with that, they're like, oh, you know what? He should be favored. He can beat the guy standing up on the ground. He has more experience, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is they didn't do their homework with Caio. So the minute Caio...
Tough to a lot of times with the local scene, right? Before Battlefield was on UFC Fight Pass, you can't get any of that footage.
No, you can't. And with Caio, they did. I was surprised that... I know Shaflarski's camp did their homework.
Okay.
Because the way... what Kevin was trying to do was, he was really trying, like I told Caio before the fight, look, it's pretty simple what his strategy is going to be. You're faster than him. I know as a fact. You hit harder than him. You're a better athlete than he is. So he's going to try to maul you, get you up against the fence, and try an inside leg trip, and try for a single, and we're going to stuff that all day. And with the minute he does that, because I saw his previous fights and I noticed that he was very passive. If you leave Kevin alone, Shaflarski alone, he's okay with it, as long as he's one-upping you. And he gets in kind of this compromising position. Caio doesn't compromise with anyone.
No.
He wants to win every second of that round. And people said, oh, you couldn't put him away, didn't get a knockout. That guy spars with John Jones, man. He knows how to survive.
And he looked to have a great chin on him. He took some serious punches.
Jeez.
He took some great shots to the liver.
Yeah.
He was
Jeremy, I saw, no joke, sorry to interrupt.
No.
A couple left, like we were working, angling, stepping to the right, working on constructively slipping off that jab, ducking underneath it, or even just kind of beating him with the jab with our cross.
Yes.
The overhand left, a looping left hook, a straight left, which all landed. But I noticed that he'd land that punch, and then Shaflarski was so good at just shutting down and shelling up and circling out. And Caio, to his credit, he land the cross, go downstairs, would rip two good body shots, come upstairs. But they were knocking him, saying, "Oh yeah, he couldn't knock him out, couldn't put him away." Caio did everything he could to put him away. Shaflarski was the dance takes two.
100%.
Shaflarski wasn't interested.
100%. Do you feel like the lights and cameras might have gotten to this guy?
I think you know what it was. I think he's just. We got to give Caio a little more credit.
Okay.
I think Shaflarski's better than what people think from that showing.
Well, he threw 22 punches.
He threw 61,
but landed
22. Caio threw 166, landed 130.
Yes.
But you got to think about this. Caio's last four opponents, they were pretty decent.
Oh yeah.
And they lasted only the first round.
Yes.
So the fact that he can go 3 rounds with Caio and kind of like, shell up and stay defensive and just get away, it's a compliment to him, because I train with Caio, I hold pads for him, and to take the beating that Shaflarski took and was able to finish the 3 rounds, hats off to that guy. He's got my respect.
He wasn't even bloodied up or anything. He has a strong leather face. But there was a photo. I saw Caio posted it. I also saw on Getty Images, actually, a punch that Caio landed right to the body there, where his body looked like it was imploding. So I'm surprised he didn't even go down from that.
He didn't. And you know what? The Caio's low kicks, you don't hear a slap in echo in the arena.
Yes.
What you hear is a nice thud. And that first low kick, when it landed on his inner thigh, I looked at Kevin's face, you could see, it reminded me of Lee Mean in his first fight when he took that low kick from Caio. He had this disgruntled look on his face. And I thought, oh, we got him.
Changed
right.
the game. Changed the
Oh,
game
my
completely.
Lord.
So you watched the fight. The commentators, like you said, you were working on slipping, throwing, straights, overhands. The commentary team was saying that he was just throwing wild. What are your thoughts with that?
Would you think, if you watched video footage of Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mauler, would you say he looks wild?
No, not at all.
He was a world heavyweight champion,
Well,
innovator.
wild, but landing.
Wild and landing, an explosive brawler.
Yes.
So Caio showed a boxer-puncher style. Yeah, maybe a couple times he wung the left hook a little bit wide, but Kevin Shaflarski's boxing is really good when I watched his last fight. So Caio had to work to land those two shots, and he did it with a more Tysonistic approach. Head, body, head combinations, and then Shaflarski would shell away. And that seemed to be the pattern for the most part. So yeah, I think Shaflarski again showed good defense enough to survive, but man alive, Jeremy, I was holding a donut pad. You're familiar with those?
Yeah.
With a 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock position. So I'd lay it on my leg, hold the punches here, hold it to my body. I was getting really more intimate in the pad work with Caio. Oh my Lord, Jeremy. I was like icing my legs up, everything the next day. Like I was literally like a velociraptor at home with nerve damage. I'm looking at the ceiling like this because of all the impact that Caio was giving me with the pads. And I've held pads from Maurice Smith. I've held pads for, way back Josh Barnett. I remember holding pads from. Caio has to be like probably one of the hardest strikers I have ever held pads for.
And he's not a giant heavyweight.
No. But he's explosive.
Yes. And his footwork is good, which they didn't talk about enough, I don't think, in that fight.
I think also he didn't get his just due with the footwork. In the first round he should have. In the second round he injured his ankle quite severely, kicking Shaflarski's elbow. So the ankle swelled up, but to Caio's credit, okay, so here I am, Jeremy. I go back at the end of the second round. I said, you're doing really well, doing great. And Caio doesn't mention anything to me. But his ankle, he can barely walk on it. He doesn't tell me once. It's almost like he's made a commitment to not tell me, not tell anyone. I'm going to go through this third round, take this pain, and finish this fight the way I should. And also his left hand just completely swelled up. You got to think 166. 130
heavyweight as well.
Heavyweight, you're gonna heavyweight. Yeah. Those are middleweight middleweight statistics, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, coming away from it, the fight ends. Obviously, so proud of you. You're in the cage,
thanks,
giving him the high five, giving him a hug. Lance is in there as well.
It's great.
And the judges are reading the scorecards. Thoughts going through your head?
Oh, geez, Murphy. I had no doubt. I thought.
Obviously he won it. So going back then, okay, he obviously won all 3 rounds. There's no doubt there. Scorecards, we know that. Going back into the back, you guys aren't back there with them when they're sitting in those seats, correct?
I'm not, no.
So you're out. Dana's talking to Laura Sanko, giving her.
Sorry to interrupt. To clarify more on what you're asking, this will bring a lot more clarity.
Mick Maynard.
He looked over at Lance and I, and he made eye contact with Lance because I was looking at Caio saying something. He looked at Lance and went, 2 thumbs up. He was a big fan. So already we had 1 of the 3. I looked over at Dana White when I walked in the cage because after we had that conversation before, I did a little Muay Thai bow to him. I put my hands like this, and he was like, right on. Like he gave me an acknowledgement.
For sure.
So it made me feel,
so going through your head, obviously, it was a decision. It was a dominant performance in your eyes, in Caio's eyes, in obviously your students' eyes, not in the commentators' eyes. A lot of the fans on Twitter, they weren't fans of it either. But at the end of the day, he got the job done. He beat an 11-fight winning streak guy, and he got the contract. Was there any doubt in your head that Dana would say, I don't know, especially with the performances? Like, usually he doesn't give contracts to all 5 guys either, right?
Yeah,
he doesn't
100%.
give them to all of the winners. He gives them to the big knockouts, the great submissions, the guys who finish fights. So
Jeremy, you know what? I had no doubt, but okay, so almost like after the victory he won, we went to the back. Caio called his wife, FaceTime, and it was an emotional moment for him. They started crying. I started crying. I've spent thousands of hours with this guy, so it's like there's such a camaraderie there. His father goes to me, Chris, you're like his second father, and that's what I feel like up here in my responsibility. We're super close. So we cried, and I realized it would be so disheartening if he didn't get that contract, and he performed so well. And I think the people on Twitter and everything was all upset because sometimes with the commentators, they control the narrative.
100%.
But we know what the true narrative was. I don't mean to Morgan Freeman this, but it is what it is. Caio had a great fight. I just think that the commentators had a lack of knowledge of Caiu's style and his ability and his quality of opposition. They didn't know much about him, so when Shaflarski did not go to their narrative of him winning, they were like, okay, well, what's he doing?
Yes.
So I think they just were just a little biased. I hate to say that.
Makes sense. And I want to say, because I watched the fight on the weekend, Vicente Luque against Rafael dos Anjos, and Luque dominated the fight, all 5 rounds, pushed him up against the cage, and just grinded the fight. And Paul Felder was commentating that fight and said it was a smart game plan. So what's the difference between that being a smart game plan and Caio dominating a 30-27 fight?
You know what? Good question, Jeremy. I'm not in his set, but I'll tell you what. If I ever personally meet Felder, I'd like to ask him myself.
Yeah, I just think, and like you're saying, it's knowledge of the fighter.
Yeah.
So he knows what Vicente Luque is up against in RDA.
There you go.
And it's different in that perspective.
Well said.
So Dana White had the post-fight press conference, was asked about all the fighters and how he decided on making these, signing these guys. He was asked about Caio, and Dana straight up said, I didn't love the heavyweight fight. I didn't love it. But he went through the notables. He trained with John Jones, the 11-fight win streak.
Yeah.
So going forward,
oh gosh, Jeremy.
obviously Caio's going to want to get in there as soon as possible.
Sorry, one thing I'll say though, before we go forward.
Yes.
He gets the contract. They agree. Caio's doing one of these, like, I got it. He gets up. The first thing he does, he sees me, he gives me a high five. I almost fainted. My knees got rubbery. I was so excited for him, I nearly fainted, and I turned to Lance and go, Lance, I almost fainted. He goes, okay, just breathe. Just breathe. So he was there like, I was hyperventilating.
Yes.
So the excitement. Because
And obviously Lance knows what's up. I mean, he's got his son, he's got Julia, he's got...
He was brilliant.
Right?
You know what, man? It was great to have someone so calm, cool, collective. Yeah. And he knows everybody. We're walking around there. Hey, Chris, so-and-so, this is my good friend Chris, and he's got his fighter fighting. He knew everybody. So it was like he was... And I've been out of that world for a really, really long time. He's always in it.
Yeah.
So he was able to go, Chris, this guy, and it was great for him to introduce me to everyone. Lance, I love him, and I'm glad I got my brother in the corner with me. It was wicked.
I wanted to ask that. Obviously Caio has gone out there and trained with those guys because he has a heavyweight out there as well that Caio's trained with. But Franco Gibson, split a long time ago. Yeah. How did this all come back together?
Yeah, you know what? So when I moved to Coquitlam about 2 years ago, okay, I go back to Coquitlam. I bought a home there for my family, and I started kind of like doing my errands around that area. It brought back a flood of memories of when Lance and I used to hang out all the time and ran our gym together, and we were inseparable.
Yeah.
And you know what? I went out there and I was like, I want to get a hold of him. I want to talk to my brother and just connect with him again and just go for lunch. It started with that.
Yeah.
And then he's like, why don't you come down? Why don't we do some cross training? And I said, sure, let's do it. Because Lance and I are old school. We don't like to cross train locally.
Yes, yeah.
But because we want to keep everything in house. But it's official. Our fight teams are going to be working together.
Okay.
So twice a week we get together, whether it's going to be in the Sunshine Coast at his gym or even over here.
Yeah.
And Terrence is a 185er. But he was giving up weight to spar with Caio. Terrence is a beast. He was going totally...
He's a former football player?
Former professional football player, now 2-0 as an MMA fighter. Look for great things with Terrence.
Yeah.
And of course, Julia Budd, 4-time Bellator champion, who's scheduled to fight soon in the next PFL, needs no introduction and was robbed in her fights. Robbed. Those last 3 fights I saw her, I've judged it. She's won all 3 of her last fights. Very close. I just felt that it was a little bit... those judges, were just, I don't know what they were thinking.
That's why you don't want to leave it in their hands.
You don't want to leave it in their hands. And Julia, and these are, look at Pacheco.
Yeah.
She's the current PFL champion. Julia won 2 rounds out of 3. It is what it is. So anyways, then you got Junior as well. And Jaden and Junior training together. Wow, awesome. Those two rolling together.
Yeah.
It's almost like the whole gym wants to stop and just watch them train, right? So
touching on what you said there, you don't like an old school mentality of keeping it in-house, not wanting to cross-train. A lot of the local gyms here are trying to cross-train to get, the best looks, especially locally, especially trying to, grow the sport locally as well. You don't want to do that. You're combining with Gibson's. But what I wanted to ask is, obviously, not a ton of heavyweights here locally for Caio to train with. What are your thoughts on him traveling to gyms outside of Canada then? Going down to Vegas, training with the Extreme Coutures, maybe getting in there with Francis Ngannou and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on the cross-training perspective?
I am 100. He needs it. That's the missing ingredient. And even before, I should have been more clarity.
Because he trained with Arjun out in Richmond as
Yeah,
well, right?
well, he trained with Arjun, and then all of a sudden we just haven't heard from Arjun
Okay.
after. So I think those two should be training together all the time. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
We like that. I mean, Kai would be down for it. So maybe if Arjun's interested, he can get a hold of me and do something like that for cross training. But I would love Caio. We got a connection actually started with Syndicate MMA.
Okay.
Edison Lopez's former opponent that he fought and beat in the first round. He's got a bunch of guys that he can train with down there. So I'm totally open for Caio to travel, get some sparring in, go from gym to gym.